Phone number is 898-2653, but don't bother calling it because even if I'm in my office, I won't answer. I get way too much telemarketing spam, so I do not answer the phone. You can reach me by email pretty much anytime. Definitely 16 hours of the day, I'll be connected one way or another. If I'm out walking or I'm at the gym or something, my phone's with me, and it clicks, tells me if a message has come in. I'll usually reply definitely within 4 or 5 hours. I don't think I've ever taken more than a day to reply to emails. So if it's something pressing, that's a good way to reach me. Office hours are 5 to 6 p.m. Monday and Tuesday evenings, because I've got class at 6 o'clock, Monday and Tuesday nights. And then 8:30 to 9:30, Tuesdays, Thursday mornings, and by appointment. I'm generally not on campus Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, but I can be if you need to meet with me. This course is English 2030 024. Normally, 2030 is just the experience of literature, and it's kind of an introduction to literature where you study short stories and fiction, poems, and drama or plays. The department chair, however, because we went short-staffed at the last moment this semester, asked if I'd be willing to do this, and so I'm essentially teaching it the way I would one of my 2020 courses. But you get the 2030 on your transcript, okay? So it's a theme course. It's not an intro to lit course. And the theme is the Renunciation of Power. Showing up there, yeah. The Renunciation of Power in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. How many of you have seen the Lord of the Rings films? Okay. The Harry Potter films. Probably several of you. How many of you have read the Lord of the Rings? Okay, one. How many of you have read the Harry Potter novels? A few of you. So this will be something new. I'll tell you right now, you can't pass the course by not reading the books and by watching the films. For the simple reason, both sets of films change the material in the books quite a bit. Okay? In fact, you'll come to know very quickly, I absolutely detest both sets of films. I think Peter Jackson has his own little circle in hell reserved for him. Okay, so the texts are the Harry Potter novels and the Lord of the Rings. I don't care what versions of the Harry Potter novels you get, whether you get paperback, hardback, Kindle, doesn't matter to me. One caveat to that, however. I'm going to be bringing in the paperback Scholastic publication publisher versions. When I refer to the books in class, I'm in the right class, right? Those are the ones I will be referred to by page number. Because the way this class will go, for example, with Lord of the Rings, is starting next week, Tuesday, we'll start with the Fellowship of the Ring, and I'm going to have the big one-volume paperback 50th anniversary edition. It's the one the bookstore should have. And so I'll say, turn to page X, Y, or Z. Turn to page 52. And we're going to start, and we'll go through there. If you've got a different edition, you're going to be responsible for finding that material in the book. Okay? So that's why I give, particular set ones. The On Fairy Stories, that's there with the link, which isn't working on this computer, hopefully. It should work on yours because it worked on mine when I made it. Did any of you get that or have it printed? It should look like this, okay? When you print it out, it should have page numbers, the whole 9 yards. We're going to spend today and whatever the day is, Thursday, going over on fairy stories. Today also obviously, the Syllabus. So, 7 Harry Potter novels and The Lord of the Rings. Total of 10 novels, and I admit some of them are pretty long. Order of the Phoenix is 878 pages, and it ought to be at most 578 pages. There's an awful lot of fluff that the editors did not want to cut out because every word was gold in terms of sales for them. Then there are a couple of supplementary materials that you need to read. Okay, Boethius, Consolation of Philosophy. Boethius was a 6th century Roman statesman who was thrown in jail by the emperor. He was thrown in jail because he was accused of having conspired against the emperor. Okay? Little problem was that he and the emperor were very, very close. They were good friends. And so Boethius gets thrown into prison, and he's a Christian. He's like, why me, God? What did I do to deserve this? And the way he writes Consolation of Philosophy is the goddess philosophy comes to visit him and to explain to him, essentially, why bad things happen to good people. In other words, why does evil exist in the world? Pretty important little book. Okay? One of the most important books from the time it was written, for about the next 1,000 years. Okay? Frequently referred to, etc. And you're going to see that The Lord of the Rings is very Boethian. Okay? When we get to the actual schedule of readings and all that, you'll see the date by which you need to have read the Consolation of Philosophy. And it's not that long. It's 100, maybe 120 pages, if you print it out. Okay? And then the next thing is, definitely not the Consolation of Philosophy, is some writings by a German, mid to late 19th century German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche, the guy who founded, essentially, the school of philosophy called nihilism. Related to the word annihilate, which nihilism means there's no meaning in the world, so why not just kill yourself? I mean, it's ultimately what it boils down to. And you got a couple, background things, but then 2 works in particular I want you to read. Beyond Good and Evil, especially Part 5. So if you skip the first 4, that's okay, especially Part 5. And Thus Spake Zarathustra. Okay? It'll become clear why you're reading Nietzsche when we get to, for example, the end of the first Harry Potter novel. People think, Harry Potter, man, it's light and fluff. Well, some of it is. But the further along you go, the less fluffy it is and the more chewy and hard and meaty it becomes. Okay? Course description. As the title implies, the specific theme of the course is the renunciation of power in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and Rowling's Harry Potter novels. And the title I kind of modified / stole from C.S. Lewis. When the 3rd volume of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, was published in England in 1955, Lewis wrote a review called The Dethronement of Power. So I've just taken dethronement, pushed that aside, and replaced it with renunciation. Pretty big difference, by the way, between dethronement and renunciation. Dethronement means if somebody were sitting in this chair and I came up and just did that, they would be dethroned. Renunciation is like, no, I don't even want to come near that chair. Okay? It's renouncing something. So, the course examines the ways in which each author focuses on the uses and abuses of power, and ultimately how each author suggests humility, restraint, sacrifice, or the renunciation of power as the means to resist and defeat arrogance, ambition, and the will to power. Okay? Look at the disclaimer. Hopefully it's up there. Yeah. Syllabus is subject to revision. What does that mean? Means we might get behind. Okay? So some things might have to get moved around a little bit. We won't drop anything. We can't drop anything. You can't read the first 2 volumes of The Lord of the Rings and not read Return of the King. You can't read the first 6 volumes of Harry Potter and not read Deathly Hallows, because it just wouldn't make any sense. Okay? But any changes that are made to the syllabus will be made in class. It's your job to kind of keep track of that. Okay? What else? If I've got to cancel class for any reason, I'm sick, kid's sick, something, accident, I'll let you know by 7 o'clock that morning. I'll send out an email. I'll post something to D2L and or Pipeline. Okay? So, check your email before you come to class. Just be forewarned. Students with disabilities, you know who you are. Get me the appropriate paperwork on Thursday. Class attendance, civility, and all that kind of stuff. Attendance is required and expected. I'll tell you right now, I'll take attendance at least the first 2 weeks because MTSU requires it. Okay? Because the feds are getting more and more involved in, our daily lives. You're allowed 2 absences. Those are freebies. You want to get drunk Monday night and not come to class Tuesday morning, that's up to you. Okay? But you miss a 3rd class and your final semester grade drops by 1 letter grade. You've done everything, you've been to class, you've been the most brilliant person on the face of the planet, but you had 3 absences, your A goes to a B. No exceptions. Okay? You miss 4 and you fail the course. Okay? What else? If you know you're going to miss class, we meet Tuesdays and Thursdays. In Murfreesboro, Tuesdays and Thursdays are one of the biggest days for cops to write tickets to appear in court for. Don't ask me why, but it's Tuesday, Thursday mornings, I think, and Monday nights. If you know you've got to miss class, let me know ahead of time. 9 times out of 10, that won't count against the 2 freebies. Okay? Similarly, happens every semester. If an emergency erupts in your life, family emergency, personal emergency, death of a loved one, something like that, let me know immediately. All right? I will bend over backwards to work with you. I will do everything in my power to help you complete the course in the allotted time, or even with it in incomplete. But if you wait until a week before the end of the semester and you come up to me and say, Dr. Sherman, and you're all teary-eyed, puppy face and everything, and you say, Dr. Sherman, I'm sorry, I've had this going on for the last 6 weeks. I'll be really sorry that you've had this going on for the last 6 weeks, but you're still getting an F for the course. Because by that point, it's too late. So let me know ahead of time, and I'll just warn you right now. I guess I have a curse or something, because about the past 4 semesters in a row, I've had students have family members die, students have family members get diagnosed with cancer. I mean, you name it, pretty much it's happened. So I understand if you leave. Just let me know ahead of time. What else? Papers are due at the beginning of class on the assigned days, unless directed otherwise, or unless you've spoken with me ahead of time. If you know when a paper is due, because it's in the syllabus, and you know that you're not going to be here that day, let me know ahead of time. We'll arrange something. Or a week before the paper is due, you've gotten very sick, let me know. We'll arrange something. Okay? Coming in on the Thursday after a paper is due on Tuesday and turning a paper in will be an automatic F. I won't read it. Okay? Stuff there about common standards of decency. Yeah. Failure to complete any assignment other than possible quizzes will result in an F. Because think about it. You've got 2 exams, 1 paper, and then possible quizzes. 2 exams, you failed to do 1. That's a third of your grade. You can't pass the class with a 0 for a third of your grade. Because what does that leave the rest? About a 66, I guess. I guess theoretically, that would be like a D. But if you don't turn in one of your assignments, the odds are that the other two are not going to be 100s. The odds are they're probably going to be, at best, an 80. You're not going to pass the class, okay? So it's physically impossible. Quizzes, I understand if you can't find a parking spot, you're coming from BAS or the rec center or something, and you get here and it's 5 minutes after the quiz has been started or something, okay? You miss a quiz, that's not going to hurt you that much. If we do quizzes, there'll probably be a total of 100 points. You miss 10 points on a quiz, you do well in all the other quizzes, you can still end up with 70, 80, 90 points, okay? That happens repeatedly, obviously, then that will start to affect your overall grade in the course, so you don't want that to happen. You got information there about how to calculate your grade. It's pretty easy. Reading schedule. Have the material read for the day that it's assigned in class. For example, I don't necessarily expect you to have read the Faerie stories for today. It would have been nice. I think I asked, but I don't remember if I sent out the link. Did I include the link? Yeah, it was on the syllabus. It was my previous class. I forgot to put it on the syllabus and forgot to send them the link until yesterday afternoon. But for Thursday, definitely have read all of Faerie stories. I don't expect you to have read all of the Fellowship of the Ring by Thursday, but I do want you to have it read by Tuesday. Okay? If you've never read it before, let me give you a little warning. You'll probably get bogged down a little bit in names. There's a lot of names in Tolkien. Okay? And again, the films won't cut it. They really will not cut it. Okay? Also, next Monday, you're to start reading the Boethius material. 2 days for Fellowship of the Ring. Then we have, that's not right. That's not right. That, the 8th? We don't have Labor Day in this class. The 7th. Why is that the 8th? Are those dates all wrong? Yeah. Should be the 9th, the 11th. They're all off by 1 day. Okay, so as with all my other syllabi, I've got to fix the dates on this. We do have class that day. So we could probably go over a little bit to Fellowship of the Ring and Two Towers. Two Towers is then going to finish, I guess on the 16th, something like that. Pull my calendar. No, that is right. For some reason, dates are right. For some reason, I was just putting that in there. So Fellowship, Two Towers. I think what we're going to try still to do, though, is we're still going to try to finish Fellowship on the 3rd, because that'll give us a little bit more time later on, and we're going to need it when we get to Harry Potter. So hopefully all goes according to schedule. We will finish Lord of the Rings on the 22nd of September, and which is very appropriate, by the way, because that's Bilbo and Frodo's birthday. And we'll distribute the Tolkien exam. It's take-home essay. We'll talk about more of that more later. That will then be due 1 week later, okay, on the 29th. Notice I have Philosopher's Sorcerer's Stone, 2 days, Chamber of Secrets, 2 days. We won't need all of 2 days for each of those. probably get through Sorcerer's Stone in a day and a half. So more than likely, we'll try to start Chamber of Secrets on the 29th. I don't put that in the syllabus simply because, I'll say that now and then I'll find a rabbit trail to run off and we'll get behind. Okay? And that's how I would end up having to adjust the syllabus. Start the Nietzsche material around October 1st. If you could start it earlier, that'd be good. In fact, yeah, you should have started it earlier because you want to understand why it's important at the end of Sorcerer's Stone. I must have been really confused when I made this syllabus. And then Prisoner of Azkaban, fall break, another day for Prisoner of Azkaban. This is where we'll probably need an additional day. I've got 3 days for Goblet of Fire. If you've read the Harry Potter stories, you know the first 3 books are really not very long. About 200 pages. And it's 200 pages in kind of large print, and the print is not all close together, and the pages are kind of thick, so it's kind of fluffy material. The 4th book, however, is quite a bit different. The 4th book is really the most important book in the series. The first 3 books point to the 4th book, and the last 3 books flow from the 4th book. The 4th book is like a hinge. Without it, everything falls apart. Okay? And it's also long. It's the first really long book, and it's the first dark book, okay, where she gets into some pretty serious matter, including death. But then we have Order of the Phoenix, which is like Goblet of Fire on steroids. Okay? If you know anything about the publishing of the novels, how many of you grew up reading these? Anybody? A few of you. Okay. Book 4 came out in the summer of 2000. Book 1 came out in 97, Book 2, 98, Book 3, 99, Book 4, summer of 2000. When did Book 5 come out?
Was it 2005?
Summer of 2003. So you had to wait 3 years. Okay? When Book 4 came out, it was a huge bestseller. But Amazon was big, but it wasn't really big in 2000. By 2003, Amazon had become pretty big. By the time Book 5 came out in 2003, it had, before you could even physically touch or see the book, it had over 8 million online sales. First time in history anything like that had ever happened. Okay? Why? Well, because you had all these people who had read the first 4, and now they've had to wait 3 years to find out. And little snippets had been leaked, like a major character dies. Right? A newspaper in Canada, I don't know if you're familiar with this, a newspaper in Canada actually published, the day the book came out, an obituary for the character that dies at the end of Book 5. And they were, if I remember correctly, they were immediately sued by J.K. Rowling's lawyers because they spoiled, this huge ending. But there was all kinds of stuff. I mean, there were articles about when she killed off this character, she came down from upstairs crying to her husband, and it was all talked about. And so people are thinking, man, this is a really major character. It's Dumbledore, it's Hermione or Ron or somebody. But the Goblet of Fire is bloated. It could easily lose 300 pages. But we'll, not Goblet of Fire, Order of the Phoenix. But we'll try to keep it to 3 days. HalfBlood Prince, I could probably add 2 days easily. It's not nearly as long as Order of the Phoenix, but it's a lot more important in terms of the information she adds in it. And then Deathly Hallows, I could easily add 3 or 4 more days. Because the Deathly Hallows is the most intricately crafted of all of the novels. And it has to tie up all the loose ends, which it does a pretty good job of. Okay. December 1st, I will distribute the Rowling exam, which is the final exam. And it will be due on December 7th. That's not a Tuesday, that's a Monday. Okay? It'll be due Monday, December 7th at noon or by noon in my office, Peck Hall 352. If I'm not there by the time you submit it, as long as it's before noon, you just put it on the box on my door. I'll probably come up that morning, I don't know, 10 or 10:30 or maybe even 11. But if when I leave at about 12:05 and it's not in my hands, it's an F. Because I will not be back on campus before I submit grades. That morning, I'm teaching an overload this semester, which means I have an additional course. That morning, I will be receiving 75 papers. Your papers are 7 to 10 pages. My upper division Shakespeare students are something like 8 to 12 pages. So roughly 75 papers by, let's say, 8 pages. You do the math. That's a lot of grading to do within about 5 days. Okay? I'm not going to be up here sitting in my crappy little office. I'm going to be sitting at home, probably with a cigar and a glass of scotch. Because it really helps sometimes. Okay? Term paper is due on December 1st. Okay? Now, examinations. You're going to write 2 of these. Okay? One 750 to 1,000 word take-home exam on the Tolkien material, and same length exam on the Rowling material. Okay? You're going to get several topics to choose from. You only do one. Okay? You must follow the directions that will be included in the exam, as well as these directions. Guess what? These directions will be copied and pasted directly into that exam. Okay? For the Tolkien exam, you must have 5 direct quotations, not paraphrases or summaries, but direct quotations from the Lord of the Rings. Pretty clear, right? It's very straightforward. How many direct quotations? 4. No, 5. You'd be amazed at what I get. Not a semester has gone by, probably the last 4 years, where somebody has done 3 or 1. If you do 7, that's great. Okay? You can have more than 5, but you have to have at least 5. Okay? For the Rowling, you must have, notice, it's not 5 direct quotations, it's direct quotations from at least 5 different Harry Potter novels. Okay? So it's not 2 quotations from Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and 3 quotations from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Well, that's 5 quotations. Yes, it is. But that's only 2 separate books. Okay? Why is this important? Because here's how I grade your papers. I gather them all together. I put them in alphabetical order. And I start just by doing this. I look at the top. Why? Go to the end of the next paragraph. Failure to include a title on your paper, failure to turn in your paper at the assigned date time, and or failure to follow any of these directions will result in an automatic F. So, I take your papers and I just look at the top. Is there a title? If not, it gets set aside and I give you one. It's F. That's your title. And I don't read it. I don't even look at it. It's it. Okay? Once I go through all of them, I may have a stack that don't get graded. Usually it's not a stack. At most it's usually 1. Okay? I think I've had one time in about the last 4 years where I have had nobody who has done that wrong. Okay? Then, for those that will be graded, I go and I look at the works cited page. Why? Well, because for the Tolkien essay, you better have at least Lord of the Rings on the works cited. For the J.K. Rowling, there had better be 5 different Harry Potter novels. If there are 4, it gets set aside. It's an F. I don't even read it. Okay? Those that make that cut, I then go through and I pull out a pen and I start going through the paper and I find quotations and parenthetical citations. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I go through and count them. And if there are 4 from Lord of the Rings, I set it aside. It's an F. Okay? For the Harry Potter, there's got to be 5 different Harry Potter novels. Well, once I go through all that, then I actually sit down and grade the stack that's left. Those papers, I'll spend anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, maybe longer on. Okay? A lot of English professors will spend maybe 15 minutes. So when you get your paper back, even if you get an A, even if I write, this is wonderful, this is superb, it's still going to be marked up. Why? Because it's not going to be perfect. None of us produces perfection. As much as we might think we do, or as much as we might hope we do, we don't. Okay? There's always room for that. I used to be an editor of a scholarly journal. It's inbred in me. Okay? So that's what I'll do for the exams. The paper. Notice, your paper must include substantive direct quotations, not paraphrases or summaries, but direct quotations, from at least 5 different Harry Potter novels, and 5 substantive direct quotations from the Lord of the Rings. So, your term paper, okay, is going to have 10 direct quotations. It's going to have at least those 6 items on the works cited page, but we're not done yet. Because you also have to have 5 separate scholarly secondary sources that you're going to refer to. Okay? So what's a secondary source? I don't think I brought any of my other books with me. Yeah. Article, chapter, and a book. This, which I'm using for my previous class, this would be a primary work. This is the novel you're writing about. Say this was Lord of the Rings. That's your primary text. A secondary text would be an article somebody has written directly about something in the Lord of the Rings. Okay? Or a chapter in a book, an anthology of criticism about the Lord of the Rings, or about Harry Potter. And there's tons of stuff about both Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Okay? The tertiary work would be like an encyclopedia entry about J.K. Rowling that refers to something in Harry Potter, or about Tolkien that refers to something in the Lord of the Rings. So, your works cited is going to have at least 15 entries for that term paper. Okay? And then I have a little paragraph about what kind of papers can expect to receive, what kinds of grades. And then a comment or two about paraphrases and how they must be properly introduced and such. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you need to see me. Okay? Why is it important to properly indicate where a paraphrase begins? What might you be accused of doing?
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism. Because the paraphrase, you take somebody else's words, put them in your own words, right? But who do the ideas still belong to? The person you borrowed them from. That's their intellectual property. They own it. Literally. Okay? So when you borrow that from them, you have to give them credit. Credit doesn't only mean their name and a parenthetical citation at the end. It also indicates where you begin borrowing. So you can do, one critic writes, that's the introductory tag. You paraphrase, parenthetical citation at the end shows where it ends. But the one critic means this is no longer my ideas. This is what somebody else has said. You don't include that, and you're just writing on along your own voice, your own argument, and then you throw in a paraphrase. What I'll do is, where does this paraphrase begin? Is the citation for this sentence and the sentence above, the entire paragraph, the entire page? I've gotten papers before where every paragraph has a citation at the end. And that's it. And I'm like, is the whole freaking thing paraphrased? Because it's impossible to tell at that point. Okay? Possible paper topics. You can use one of these. I would frankly prefer you came up with your own, or you can modify one of these. Okay? First one's really original. The Renunciation of Power in The Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter novels. It's the title of the course. The War on Terror in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Terrorism in the novels. And both of those, by the way, are very applicable to these novels. The virtues of mercy and pity in the novels. Christianity in the novels. And if you don't think Christianity is in Harry Potter, you haven't read the books. My terminology, I don't really mean to offend you, but part of me really does. If you're one of the right-wing wacko fundamentalist Christians who wants to burn J.K. Rowling, you need to read the books before you strike the match. Okay? And I'll give this to them. If all their experience of Harry Potter is watching the films, some of what they say can be justified. I've not seen the last two films. I won't see the last two films because I know what they leave out at the beginning of the first one and at the end of the second one. And by leaving out something from the beginning of the book and the end of the book, they change the entire meaning of all 7 books. The books become, or the story becomes about revenge. And it's not. It's just the opposite. Just the opposite. Okay? Sacrifice. This isn't like, go get a virgin and find an altar sacrifice. It's self-sacrifice, okay? Humility in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter is fairy stories. It's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Self-denial in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. Good and evil. Death. You can even do God in The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. A writer for Time magazine, a novelist on his own, and a literary critic named Lev Grossman wrote a column in 2007 when the 7th Harry Potter novel came out, titled something like, "Where is God in Harry Potter?" And it's an article and an interview with J.K. Rowling. And it's really interesting because he says that in this interview, he says, you essentially, you kill God. And she's like, whoa, what? And he said, well, God's absent from the series. I mean, you can't find God. And she's like, I think he's a little more present than you see. He didn't have a clue what she was talking about. Okay? Early in the publication of the novels, I think it was spring of 2000, she gave an interview with a reporter from the Vancouver Sun newspaper. And this was at the time when, especially fundamentalist Christians in the United States were literally burning her books and consigning her to hell for leading Christian children astray and wanting to get kids involved in satanic worship there. I mean, this is what was said. This writer said, now, are you a Christian? I mean, just nothing like the nice blunt question. And she said, yes. Well, lots of people can say that. What do you mean? And she said, I'm a member of the Church of Scotland, which means Presbyterian. Presbyterians aren't known for being namby-pamby, wishy-washy, especially Church of Scotland Presbyterians. They're the ones who used to burn witches in the 15th and 16th centuries and burn Catholics, by the way, also. Right? And the writer said, well, but what does that mean for your works? What does that mean for the Harry Potter stories? And she said, well, if I were to answer that now, it would give away the ending. Okay, so what does that mean? If she were to answer, what does Christianity have to do with Harry Potter? To answer that would give away the ending seems to indicate what? That it's involved in the ending. It's involved with the overall arc of the story. In other words, she's not trying to seduce your children into paganism, playing with Ouija boards or whatever you want to call it. Okay? And then the last thing on the syllabus, you have a sample what the top of the first page should look like. Okay? I wanted to fit it on one page. Ted Sherman, English, Ted Sherman, November, that's all double spaced. Okay, that's why I say, first page should look like this, all double spaced. Please, 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 don't be like the one student I once had. And put my name at the top, and my name over here. Similarly, I did once with the syllabus, I put your name, English 2020, and then your last name, and I'm not kidding, I got a paper that said your name and your last name. And I had to come into class and go, who is your name? Because, yes, I was going to embarrass that person. Who is your name? So don't do that. Okay, any questions about the syllabus? Like I said, I know, with the quotation stuff, sounds like I'm coming across as a hard ass and all that. A basic rule of success in life, follow directions. It's real simple. You don't want to get roughed up by a cop, follow directions. You don't want to get roughed up by your boss, do the work you're told to do, how you're told to do it. If you're told to, if you're given total leeway, then carte blanche, man, have at it. Be crazy, be creative. Probably not going to be that way. Okay? You want to pass in here? Pass. Follow directions. Yes.
I don't know if you do this, but where I came from, one of my English teachers, if we wrote the paper early, he wouldn't actually read it, but he would look over it and see if we got everything right. Would you do something like that?
I will look over your paper to do one thing, to tell you whether or not you are on the right track.
Okay.
I won't look over it to proofread. I won't check your citations. I won't spell check, and do not trust these things for spell check. They won't, you're typing on along and you type F-R-O-M and it should be F-O-R-M. Perfectly good words in the English dictionary, just entirely wrong depending upon the context. Okay, it won't catch that. So that's what I'll do. But you have to get it. You can't. If you're going to do that, it'd be best to have it to me like a week ahead of time, so the exam won't work. But the term paper, yeah, you can. I'll definitely do that. Okay. Similarly with the exam, don't email me like the night before it's due and say, "Hey, Dr. Sherman, what do you mean by this?" Because I'll send some snotty reply back like, "A little late, don't you think?" Or 5 a.m. in the morning. "I'm having trouble with my paper." I'll write back, "Damn straight you are." Because if you're doing that at 5 a.m. in the morning, okay. Okay, go back to this. Content. I don't think, no, I did pull that up, didn't I? No, that's right, the link didn't work. Did the link work on your computers?
Yeah.
Crappy Dells. Okay, that's what I have. Tolkien's on fairy stories. Move out of the way. Tolkien delivered this lecture in 1939. It was part of what's called the Andrew Lang Lecture. This was an annual lecture at St. Andrews University in St. Andrews, Scotland. He was not the first person to be invited to deliver the lecture. Okay? He was the third. The top two choices were busy, so they called Tolkien, or sent him a letter, actually. He had never published anything on fairy stories. He hadn't written articles on fairy stories. He wasn't a fairy story scholar. Okay? Andrew Lang, the guy for whom the series was named, the lectures were named, was a fairy story scholar. In the late 19th century, on into the early 20th century, he collected fairy stories and published them in a series of books that had different colored covers. So you had the red fairy book, the blue fairy book, the yellow fairy book, the green fairy book, etc. And there's like 12 or 15 of them. Okay? It's not because they're about red fairies and blue fairies. It just refers to the color of the book. But Tolkien was invited to do this lecture because of a couple of reasons. In 1936, he delivered a lecture that made him famous among a small group of people, Anglo-Saxon scholars. Tolkien held what's called, I hate it when that happens, the Bosworth, the Rawlinson Chair of Anglo-Saxon. The Rawlinson Chair of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford University. Very prestigious position. He got it in his early 30s, which was an indication this guy's top-notch. He'd worked on the Old English Dictionary, or the Oxford English Dictionary and some other stuff. But in 1936, he delivered a lecture called Beowulf, the Monsters, and the Critics. About the Old English epic poem, Beowulf. And what he did in this lecture was groundbreaking. He did something that no previous critic of Beowulf had really done. He looked at the monsters in the poem as being central to the meaning of the poem. The previous critics had read Beowulf as a source of information about Germanic culture and society. That is, they read Beowulf for what it could tell them about Germanic kingship, about gift-giving rituals, about male-female relations or rituals, about swords and armor, how it was made, how it was constructed, what it was worth, heirlooms, all that kind of stuff. Okay? In other words, they didn't read the poem as a poem. They read it as an artifact that could give them details about a culture. Tolkien said, wrong, 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 wrong. Okay? The monsters are at the center of the poem. Have any of you ever read Beowulf? The real Beowulf, not like AP English high school? Okay. Because that's not the real Beowulf. Nor are any of the films. I mean, the poem is almost a script in itself. If you just do what's in the damn poem, you would have a blockbuster film. But every script writer or director who does a film of Beowulf butchers it horribly. You end up with Angelina Jolie in gold and a tail. Okay? Grendel's mother is a hag. She's not a sexy tail cat, whatever thing she is. Okay? Grendel is not Hrothgar's son. The dragon is not Beowulf's son. At all. In any world or universe.
I've been lied to for so long.
You've been lied to for so long.
Right?
You know. Watch my lectures. You know, I've got a YouTube channel. That's why I'm recording this. I've got a YouTube channel that I put all my lectures essentially on. For my my upper division Brit Lit 1 course, I spend about 6 days, 6 85-minute days, just on Beowulf. And then I give short shrift to pretty much everything else but Shakespeare in that semester. Why? Because I teach Beowulf at the graduate level in Old English.
So if you missed it last week, you just go on your YouTube page?
Yep. That's one of the reasons. I mean, that's why I started putting them up online. But now I've got 1,000 subscribers from. I mean, literally, you go through the demographics. It's like literally every country in the world. There's one person, except for like Canada, Germany, and the UK, where there's scores or whatever. So yeah, I put everything up. So if you miss class, all you have to do is go to the playlist for this course, and
What's your YouTube?
it'll be there. Just search for Ted Sherman.
Okay.
It'll be really easy to find. So Tolkien delivered this lecture, and he says the monsters are at the center of the poem. Why? Because Beowulf has to fight them. The poem is about the rise and fall of a hero. Okay? And the monsters kind of represent cosmic forces, natural forces. Beowulf defeats Grendel and Grendel's mother because they're not that big. Yeah, they're hard. It's not a cakewalk. And he does defeat the dragon, but he dies in the process. Why? Because nobody escapes death. And he argues in that essay that all of Anglo-Saxon literature, or actually he says, he doesn't argue this, it says in just kind of a little throwaway line, all of Anglo-Saxon literature is ultimately about one theme, the death of man and all his works. Well, that's real cheery, isn't it? We live, we die, and everything we produce rots and crumbles. It's not very forward-looking, okay? So that kind of put him on the radar, so to speak. And then in 1937, he published something else. He published a little novel titled The Hobbit. Okay? The Hobbit has an interesting beginning. In the summer of, I think it was 1931, Tolkien was marking entrance exams to Oxford. These are students who had applied. You had to take an exam to get in. And he's sitting in his garage study, the study over his garage, windows open, breeze is blowing. And he's got what is essentially a blue book in front of him. And he turns over the page. I think this blue book is actually at the Bodleian Library. So you can read what the poor kid wrote and then turn over the page. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. That's all he wrote. Tolkien wrote. He had no idea what a hobbit was. Not a clue where the word came from. He'd never seen it before. Almost nobody had. We come to find out about 70 years after Tolkien wrote it, that the word hobbit does show up on two little slips of paper that were gathered in the process of creating the Oxford English Dictionary. What scholars would do is they would go and they'd pull out old volumes of books from libraries, and they'd go through and find words that began with the letter they were working on. And lo and behold, some guy found the word hobbit in a couple of medieval works. But these were works Tolkien had never seen. All right? So in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. And he's like, what in the world is a hobbit? Well, I don't know. Let's figure it out. And he starts writing a story that he tells to his children. He's got 4 kids. And after a while, he starts reading it aloud to the group of writers that he regularly meets with, the Inklings. C.S. Lewis, Hugo Dyson, Owen Barfield, Charles Williams. These guys meet together for smokes and beers twice a week. Okay? And they read what they're writing to each other for constructive criticism. And sometimes not so constructive criticism. For example, at one point, Tolkien stands up to read, and he starts, and Hugo Dyson just lets rip. Not more fucking elves. He's tired of elves. You read The Lord of the Rings, and it's an elf here, and it's an elf here, and it's an elf here, and it's an elf 5,000 years ago. It's elves everywhere. And Dyson, he'd had enough. He'd probably also had enough, if you get my drift, okay? But they critique each other's works. And when he gets to the end of The Hobbit, the general consensus is, yeah, you ought to publish this. So Tolkien has it typed up, and he sends it off to a publisher in London. And the publisher, a guy named Stanley Unwin, gets this unsolicited typescript in the mail, and it's titled The Hobbit, or There and Back Again. The what it? What's a hobbit? He has no idea. He doesn't really want to read the typescript to find out. Okay? I mean, it has a little short summary, a précis about what it's about. He's like, dwarves, dragons, really? This is the 1930s. We're enlightened. And so he gives this typescript to his 10-year-old son, Rainer. He's thinking, sounds kind of like a fairy tale. Maybe he'll be interested. And he asks his son, write me a review. And the son does. He actually types up a review, a one-page written review of The Hobbit. And he says this will become an instant classic. It will be loved by children of all ages, whether 7 or 70. Without seeking any additional input, Stanley Unwin publishes The Hobbit because of the opinion of his 10-year-old son. Okay. Speaking as a father of 2 sons and 2 daughters, this guy had a very high opinion of his son's judgment. Because to publish books is an expensive proposition. He prints 1,500 copies. They sell out. He prints another 15. They sell out. He realizes, And Rainer Unwin was correct. It is an instant classic. It's because of that primarily that Tolkien gets invited to do this. Okay? So, he shows up, and this is how he begins. I propose to speak about fairy stories, though I am aware that this is a rash adventure. Faerie is a perilous land. He's talking about the realm of Faerie, the location that fairy stories inhabit. Right? And in it are pitfalls for the unwary and dungeons for the overbold. And overbold I may be accounted. For though I've been a lover of fairy stories since I learned to read and have at times thought about them, I've not studied them professionally. There's humor buried in there. But it's humor only Tolkien was privy to. And I can't help but think that when he said these lines, he chuckled to himself. So where's the humor? Dungeons for the overbold. That is, you walk into Faerie, you better be careful. Because if you're cocky, you're arrogant, you're headstrong, you're going to get locked away. Okay? Dungeons for the overbold. And overbold I may be accounted. The name Tolkien comes from German Tolkien, which means overbold. And overbold I may be accounted. It's essentially saying, and Tolkien I may be accounted. I am what I am, in other words. Okay? So, he says he has been a wandering explorer, or perhaps trespasser, in the land. Full of wonder, but not of information. Now, this is not a very auspicious beginning for this very famous lecture. He's essentially standing up there and saying, I don't really know nothing about no fairy tales. I like them, but I've not studied them professionally. The realm of fairy story is wide and deep and high and filled with many things. All manner of beasts and birds are found there. Shoreless seas and stars uncounted. Beauty that is an enchantment and an ever-present peril. Both joy and sorrow as sharp as swords. In that realm a man may perhaps count himself fortunate to have wandered. That is, to have entered the realm of Faerie through story. Okay? But its very richness and strangeness tie the tongue of a traveler who would report them. The very richness of the imagined world. Okay? And the wonder of it, the strangeness of it, he says, makes it so that you can't describe it. Have you ever had an experience in the natural world that is almost inexplicable? You can't find the words. Maybe a sunset, a storm, a tornado, where words just fail you. That's what Tolkien's getting at. And while he is there, that is, while you're in that little world that the story has created, you're in the midst, okay, of that story, it is dangerous for him to ask too many questions, lest the gate should be shut and the keys be lost. Like what kinds of questions? How about questions about the nature of the story itself? Have you ever been reading a novel and you like the novel and you come up to a part and you go, whoa, wait a second, stop. Because back here you said, and suddenly the novel loses its appeal? That's what he's talking about. That's what he's talking about. This idea that there has to be that inner consistency of reality. You know, Lord of the Rings. You're watching the film. Boromir's getting ready there, to fight the orcs at Parthgalen. But rather than pull out his sword, he whips up from over his shoulder an Uzi. What would that do? You kind of go, really? I didn't know they had Israeli gun manufacturers in Middle Earth. Just kind of falls apart. So he says there are some questions that someone who's been asked to talk about fairy stories should probably expect to address. So what are they? And he gives us 3 questions. What are fairy stories? What is their origin? And what is their use now? Okay? You're going to talk about fairy stories. That's a pretty standard question you would think would be asked. What are they? Long answer made short. Tolkien says, I can't tell you what they are. Let me rephrase that. He says, I can't define them. He begins with the Oxford English Dictionary. Okay? Well, what does it say? It says they're stories about fairies. Or it's an unreal or incredible story. Or it's a falsehood. And he's like, man, wrong answer all 3 times. Okay? So what does he mean? You can't define them. What does the word define literally mean? Helps if you've ever had Latin. It means out of, away from, fine, related to the word finite or infinite. Think of what infinite means. In, without, finite, limit. So define out of limits. So when you're defining something, you're removing all the possibilities of meaning and ascribing one. You're limiting it. Okay? You're putting it within a box, as it were. Tolkien says you can't define fairy stories. You can't do that. You can say some works are not fairy stories, but you can't say what fairy stories are. Okay? And he gives examples of what he thinks are not fairy stories. For example, talking animal stories are not necessarily fairy stories. Because most talking animal stories are really what kind of stories? Fables, okay? But what are the talking animals?
Humans.
They're us. You just put an animal form on them. Okay? So he essentially says, what are fairy stories? Like I think it was Justice Frankfurter of the Supreme Court when they had an obscenity case come up. He says, can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it. Okay? Tolkien says, I can't tell you what it is. And in fact, what you're really doing is you're not talking about what are fairy stories, but you're trying to define that realm of Faerie, the perilous realm, he says. He says, and it can't be limited. Okay? So, I'm skipping a bunch. So he says, so let's look at the next question. What's their origin? That's not an easy question. Because Tolkien says what you're really getting at when you ask this question is, what's the origin of the fairy element in the story? Okay? The thing within the story that makes it a fairy story. Here's an example. We're reading Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter stories. There is a thing in both books. It's not the same thing. That is, it takes a different form, but it has the same power in the Lord of the Rings and in Harry Potter. Anybody know what it is? That is, if you have this thing in the Lord of the Rings, it gives you a power. If you have this thing in the Harry Potter novels, it gives you a power. It's the exact same power.
Wand.
Nope, it's not a wand.
Magic.
Close.
The cloak?
What does it do?
Invisible.
It makes you invisible. And the ring makes you invisible. Okay? That's the fairy element. Something that confers invisibility. So Tolkien's question is, what's the origin of this invisibility thing? And what he comes to discuss is, what that really means is, why is there that thing that confers invisibility in the story? What purpose does it serve? Obviously, because Tolkien has it, J.K. Rowling has it, the Nibelungenlied from the 13th century Germany has it, and there's a thing in ancient Greek literature, I don't remember what it is, that also has it. What does that mean? There is something about human nature that desires invisibility. So that's what you're getting at ultimately with this. Well, what's another example? There is in England a popular myth, and it's been made into stories and it's been made into films. And we see that myth also in The Lord of the Rings. It's about a person. What's the third volume of The Lord of the Rings titled, or the last film? The Return of the King. What's the English myth? Arthur. Arthur's the king who's been gone a long time. See, in true Arthurian myth, Arthur's not dead. Arthur is on the Isle of Avalon, and he is waiting for England to have its greatest time of trial, its greatest need. And when that moment arrives, according to the myth, Arthur will return. Okay, just think of that for a moment. Think of, format your hard drive so that there's a blank space that says, okay, this is real. Assume for a moment Arthur really lived and the myth is true and that he will return, and he does tomorrow at 11:33 in the morning. How would our understanding of reality change? It'd be a nuclear explosion in everybody's mind. Because here would come Arthur. What would he have strapped on his side? Excalibur. Who would be riding beside him? Merlin. There's not enough duct tape in the world to keep my head together. Okay? So, is there another myth about a missing king? Or a king who hasn't returned yet?
I don't know.
Jesus, here we are in the belt buckle of the Bible belt, Yeah, Christ, the eternal King of glory. He came when? The incarnation, the Advent season. Advent means literally to come. And the second coming is the second Advent, the second coming. Okay? What about the time in between? That's where we are. So does Arthur and Aragorn refer back to Christ? Or does even Christ's story go back further? Well, Tolkien's essentially going to say, no, Arthur and Aragorn, they go back to Christ because Christ is the story. He's going to say at the end of the essay, the true story. The one ultimately true story. Okay? So what he essentially does with this is, ultimately it's not that important what the origins are. But he brings up this idea, I'm running out of time. He brings up this idea of what he calls the cauldron of soup. Okay? In talking about origins. Because there are people who want to study the origins of things. Where does Gandalf come from? Where does Frodo come from? How does he get his names of things? And Tolkien essentially says, you do the research and it doesn't add to your understanding of the story. To know that Gandalf's name comes from a dwarf in the Old Norse Elder Edda, does that add to our understanding of the character of Gandalf? No, not at all. To know that the name Frodo is possibly based on the Old English name Froda from Beowulf tells us nothing about Frodo. Okay? But to know that the name Voldemort this is etymology, it's not necessarily source stuff, but to know that the name Voldemort means fly from death does tell you some things. Okay? So, the cauldron of story. Tolkien says, here's how a story is made. It's like a stew. How do you make a stew? You get a pot, you put water in it, and then what else do you put in it? Depends what kind of stew you're making. Let's say you're making beef stew. You throw in some beef. Is that it? Just beef and water? It's a pretty cheap stew. No, you put in some vegetables. Maybe some potatoes, some carrots, maybe corn and peas, maybe onion, or maybe leeks. And then you throw in some spices and maybe some herbs. And then what do? Serve it cold? No. You put a fire under it and you let it cook. Maybe you let it cook for a couple hours, in which case everything's hard and chewy. Or maybe you let it cook for a day. And it all cooks together and all the juices and flavors intermingle. That's stew. But somebody invites you over to their house and they have a table laid out and there's a tureen of water and there's a piece of beef and there's carrots and there's potatoes and there's peas and there's corn and there's garlic and there's leek and there's onion and there's spices and they say, all right, get your fork. Start down here. What do you have? You have ingredients. How are the ingredients individually? Yeah, not so great. It's like buying a car straight from the manufacturer. You get a little Mini Cooper. It comes from Oxford, England. That's where they're built. But rather than having some guy drive your Mini Cooper up to your house, instead, they deliver a big crate. And it's all the parts. Labeled. And an instruction manual to how to put it together. The one ain't nearly as fun as the other. Similarly, with the cauldron of story, you take all the ingredients out, and what do you have? Not the story. So, Tolkien says, so let's get over the story of origins. But there is one thing. There is still that element of the fairy story. Why does it survive? Because it's old. And there's something about age or antiquity that still enchants us. I teach a course on Harry Potter every other summer in London. It's a 4-week course. We travel around various places. We discuss all 7 books. But the places we go to, often there are old things. One of the things, first field trip I do is a 7-mile walking tour of London. Places associated with the films. But I also point out historical stuff. And one of the places we go by is one of the surviving Roman walls. Built over 2,000 years ago. And I'll always pause and say, go ahead. Because everybody wants to go up and start doing this. They want to touch that. Why? Because it's been there for 2,000 years. And somebody, 2,000 years ago, touched that wall. And maybe William the Conqueror touched that wall. And maybe Alfred the Great. And maybe Queen Elizabeth the First, not the second. Literally touched that wall. In other words, it's a connection with the past. Okay? All right. Now we still have a couple minutes. So he turns from there to say, okay, so origins aren't all that important. But we need to talk about children. Why? Because everybody thinks fairy tales are for children. And he says, ultimately, no. That's an accident of the 19th century. And he says, and it's an accident in the exact same way old used furniture gets put in a children's playroom. When does the couch get put in the children's playroom? Yeah, when it's no longer in good condition to be down in the living room. So you buy new furniture, you put the old stuff, because what can the kids do to it? They can't damage it any more than it already is. In other words, in the 19th century, Tolkien suggests, what happened was the kinds of stories that are fairy tales were thought to no longer be appropriate for adults. Well, what began happening in the 19th century? Well, you had the Industrial Age. You have Darwin's Origin of Species. You have this emphasis on science, reason, and logic. Okay? So let's take this make-believe stuff, give it to the kiddies. And Tolkien says that was the wrong thing to do. We'll stop there and we'll pick up there on Thursday.